Basically, I spent 20 years in the world of finance, doing all things finance and really helping companies with their strategic analysis, helping them bridge the gap between where they were and the goals, the ambitious goals, right, that they set for themselves. And so I spent 20 years doing that. And after 20 years, to be honest with you, I kind of got burnt out and I really got tired of making rich men richer and thought that I could use the skills that I gained in corporate America to be able to help women live more purposefully, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and really be able to live their life in the most purposeful way that they can.
Wow, I love that. And as I'm listening to you talk, I'm picturing you with a bunch of suits, but now I'm looking at you. You got this colorful background. You got this vibrant blue shirt. Your headshot is like, hey,
oh, goodness.
You know me. I can't even imagine you in that, not just a corporate environment, but I mean, financial people, they're a little bit different. Like they're different to connect with, different to relate to. Can we relate to them all the time? Just not helpful at all.
Yeah, that it's so interesting that you bring that up because I will say that I spent a lot of time in blues and grays and black. And as you so poignantly picked up on, I am a very vibrant kind of person. And so it took me some time to really find my voice and really get back to what I call the OG Nas, right? The original girl that God created me to be, because, so often we follow these nice, neat little paths, and my path led me to finance, and that was great financially. But in terms of what I believe that God was calling me to do, it was very different. It wasn't black or blue or gray. It was a vibrant journey where I was also helping women get out of that space and really follow where God was leading them, even if it meant that you might have to walk away from what you've always known. And so, yeah, that story is a journey in and of itself. But just being truthful to what God was calling me to do led me to leave corporate America.
Wow. I love that. I hear so much bravery in your voice. And I think when it comes to planning and prioritizing what matters the most, it really does take a bit of bravery, to walk away from what feels secure to what is abstract, and what is unknown and what is uncertain takes a whole lot of courage. So
can I add something to that? Not just bravery, but brokenness. Because the truth of the matter is that I left corporate America because I was broken. When I left, I was depleted. I was exhausted. I was really what I describe as my life was sort of in a mess. And I had prioritized that corporate success and had achieved a lot of it. I mean, if you looked on paper at my resume, oftentimes people see it and they're like, okay, I had no idea you had done all these things. But that really wasn't giving me fulfillment. It wasn't giving me a sense of purpose. It was checking the box of being able to bring a paycheck home to my family and to do what I believed I was supposed to do, right? What everyone told me I was supposed to do, go to school, get the job. And I did those things. And God really had to bring me to a place where he showed me very clearly in my brokenness that my priorities were out of alignment. And corporate America was part of that.
Oh my gosh. I wasn't anticipating this interview, like ripping me up inside, but that is so good. Thank you for adding that. So can you bring us from leave corporate America to Spark Her Blaze? How, I know that's probably like several years, but how did you get here? How did you make it to this place?
All I knew when I left corporate America was that God was calling me to something else. That's really all I knew. that was the end.
What that was, I didn't know.
And what that was, I really didn't know. I knew that I was a creative at heart, which, corporate America doesn't necessarily really value. And so I knew that I was sort of misplaced in terms of where I felt that my gifts lied and what my talents were bringing me to do. And so when I left corporate America, I thought that was going to be the answer, that just leaving in and of itself, right, was going to lend itself to me just finding what I was supposed to be doing next. And what I found was that actually in my staying busy in corporate America, it had concealed some areas that I didn't even realize needed to be addressed. And so in doing that, I really started seeking the Lord and seeking help and assistance in the areas where I believe that God was saying, these are shortcomings. You need to address these. You need to work on this. Your mental health is not where it needs to be. Your marriage is not where it needs to be. And as I did that, is when I started to hear God so clearly say to me, I see you need to be moving in this direction. I still didn't know exactly where it was. I knew it was helping women. I knew that it was using my story and my experience to help women, but I had no idea that it would lead me to essentially coaching women to basically do what I did with corporations, which is to help them move from where they are to where they want to be. And a lot of it has to do with, like you talked about a little bit earlier, getting back to those priorities of what God is calling you to do. And so that's kind of how I made the leap.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, that's so good, because I think for those of us who are type A or visionaries or pioneers, we want to start planning first, start accomplishing first, and start doing. But what I hear you saying is that God was like, no, let's press pause and go and address some of these issues. And I can relate to that a bunch of times in my life. I might need to press pause now, but I can relate to wanting to write a book or wanting to have a ministry or have a business, and really needing to do some introspective work on myself, or needing to just shore up some other areas that were falling apart. So I think that is so good that you did those foundational things first before you could even see. And sometimes you can't even see. You can't even see the creativity, or you don't even have an idea, because there's so many other things, relational issues or personal issues or mental health, as you say, that are pressing, that you need to do those first, so that you can free up your mind to even begin to do that.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. And that's what God showed me in a very deliberate and purposeful way.
I bet he did. Knowing God, I bet he did. So then, were you able to kind of formalize a process of walking ladies through? And can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I know you wanted me to kind of talk about, how do you sort of take time to really start strategically, right? Sort of planning what you're going to do next. What are you going to do next? And for us, our next is 2022 for many of us. And so I feel like I kind of put together what I call the APB of purposeful planning. Why APB? Because you think about when they're looking for somebody that they want to arrest, right? They put out this APB. This is what we're looking for. They got these characteristics, that kind of characteristics. This is what you need to be on the lookout for. And I feel like God is kind of like calling us to be arrested, right? He's like, hey, I got some things I want you to do. And so we got to kind of look at what are the things that we should be looking for? What are those things that we should be doing so that we can be arrested and really captive to what God is calling us to do? And so the first thing that I often encourage women to do is something that I did a lot in corporate America, which we call the autopsy. And I know that sounds kind of gross, but the reality is
bad. Oh my God.
It sounds bad. But there is not a corporation, I don't think, that is successful that doesn't at the end of every quarter, every year for sure, they are doing what's called an autopsy. They're looking at the data for the previous year, and they are saying what had happened in the last quarter, right? What had happened in the last year. You cannot start really making plans for what's next until you understand what happened. And so what I often encourage women to do is to first things first is to do an autopsy of 2021. You got to look at it. You got to say, how did it go? What went well? What did not go well? Really take that time and block out time. We would have management retreats where we would take whole weekends, right, to essentially just go back and autopsy. And I think a lot of times as women, we want to kind of ignore that part. We're like, oh, the autopsy, that's the year over. We don't need to, let's move on. But you can't really address what you don't first assess. And so going back and doing that autopsy is like critical. And
But wait a minute, wait a minute. I mean, we done went through 2020 and 2021. To do an autopsy on those years, it's like you got to do an autopsy just for the year, then do an autopsy for your life within the year, because it's just been so much.
Yeah. Usually what I tell women to do is to start with two things: your calendar and your checkbook. That's going to give you so much data. I know that's not where we want to go. That's exactly. We want to keep the dead things. But the reality is, situation is, we got to start with the calendar and the bank account and really get a sense of how you spent your year. Because I think a lot of times there's a disconnect between how we think we spent our year and how we actually spent our year. And so for us to really deal with the facts, we got to deal with the facts. So I would say taking that time to just look at your calendar, look at each month, and really kind of allocate, like, how did I spend my time? I will actually put it into categories. This, I spent, oh goodness, this amount of time with family, this amount of time doing work, this amount of time, really just kind of giving yourself an idea of how you spent your time. Because that is going to be critical to how you go about approaching the new year. So that's the A part. It's the autopsy.
I can't take them. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk about dead things, but the scriptures talk about you got to die first, so you can live. So
I'm dead. I'm dead already. Okay, go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
All right. So then that gets you to the P, right? And the P is something that I cannot stress enough, and that is our priorities. Kind of building on what I was talking about before, so often there's a disconnect between what we think is important and what our calendars actually say is important to us. And so we got to really get crystal clear about what are our priorities. What I challenge women to do is to do something that I call a priority vision cast. And you have my prioritizing tool. So that is the first thing that we do before we even get into, to-do lists or anything like that, is to really sit down and say, what would God, if I was only going to focus on 5 areas of my life, what 5 areas would God want me to focus on in the upcoming year? If I could only focus on these 3 to 5 areas, what would they be? Would they be my faith? Would they be my family? Would they be my marriage? What would they be? Myself, my health, my physical well-being? What would God say I want you, Nigel Drakes, you, Kia Stevens, to be focusing on in 2022? Because when we think about Habakkuk and the vision that he had, the first thing usually when we start reading that, we start with the part we're saying that goes, and he answered, right? So for God to be answering, that means someone had to ask some questions. So you need to be asking God some questions. Lord, what's important to you? What's important to you for me in 2022? That's where we got to start.
Oh, you know what? And I'm not, I hate to interrupt you.
You're fine.
Why I'm so convicted is because I think for me, I start with what do I want to get accomplished in 2022? And Lord, will you bless this?
Bless it, Lord.
Bless it, Lord. Here's my long list that I created without you, because I'm an idea person. So my ideas are like,
yes.
So I put it all down on a piece of paper and then present it to God and ask him to bless it. But you're saying, admonishing us to start with God and say, God, what are your 5 things? Which might mean that we got to eliminate the things that God is not outlining.
Right. See, that's what happened with me. Like, I didn't even get into the details about, when I was really falling apart. And what I ultimately wound up doing is going to a silent retreat with some monks and like getting real quiet for a weekend. I'm telling you, that's what happened.
You went to a silent retreat with some monks.
I absolutely did. For 3 days. And no television, no cell phones. It literally was just prayer. They did have some sessions where they led on particular topics, but for the most part, we ate in silence. It was really just about quieting the noise all the way down. And that's where we really got to start. When we talk about asking, but then he said, you got to be listening to hear what he's saying. You got to shut up. get quiet. Listen.
Oh my God. This is all in my Kool-Aid. Woo. Okay. Naja said, shut up. I didn't tell you to shut up, but Naja did.
Sorry.
Naja said that.
I'm going to say it the nice way. Be quiet.
Yeah, we don't say that word in our house. We say be quiet. Well, I try not to. Anyways, go ahead. Okay, so the P is prioritize, and not your priorities, but what is it that God is asking you to prioritize?
Yeah. And really create a vision for that. Like, okay, so what would that look like for me? If I'm focusing, let's just say, on the area of family in 2022, what would success in that area, what would the end of that look like for me 12 months from now? Would I be having meals with my family 5 days a week? Would it be that we're doing devotions once a week? Is it that we're taking a class together? Is it that we're doing date nights monthly? You got to really, and I'm totally into, you got to be specific about it. What it is that you see for yourself 12 months based on those priorities. And you can't be too specific. The more specific you are, the more you're going to be able to measure how you made movement in that particular area. But starting with the end in mind, based on those particular priorities, is where I always start. You got to start with the end in mind.